All right, folks, we are back at Garza, Gaitan, and the game, where we're covering play-by-play everything going on in the game of politics, and there's a lot to cover today. We're here with the one and only El Señor Daniel Garza. How are you, Daniel? Are you excited about the Gold Cup win? How do you feel when Mexico beats the United States in these kind of
Oh
things?
man, you put me on the spot. And this is bittersweet, obviously. Look, Wadi, I think that the only thing that Mexico likes to think they have it on the US is in soccer. So when the US has been slapping them around for a while, it's really demoralizing. And so when Mexico can beat them again and reclaim the top spot in the continent, it's a boost of self-confidence to all Mexicans. So and a Mexican heritage. So
Yeah.
I'm happy for them, right? But yeah, don't get too comfortable, Mexico.
I hear that. I hear that. Hey, you're wearing green. Some will say it's a form of celebration, but look, a lot going outside of the game of soccer, and obviously a lot going on in the game of politics. It was 4th of July last Friday, and it was the 249th anniversary of us as a country coming up. That means next year is going to be 250 years of celebrating, but that means it's also a lot of conversations of how do we preserve a nation which our founding fathers really came here for, that freedom, for that liberty. And when it comes to freedom, when it comes to liberty, one of the big conversations is taxes. And the one big beautiful bill, which was signed on July the 4th, is one of those things that President Trump and Republicans are really doing a victory lap. This prevented one of the largest tax hikes in history on middle class Americans, on small businesses, on entrepreneurs. We've gone through in this program, in this podcast, on a lot of the benefits on the policy of this aspect. But Daniel, I want to get a little bit in the politics of it. We are next year into a midterm. Typically, it's difficult for the party in power, for the president who's newly elected, to retain a lot of these seats. But again, speaking on the politics of it, how does this prepare members not only for August recess, which is coming up when they're back in the States talking to their constituents, how does it prepare them for 2026?
Yeah, look, Wadi, you invoked our 249th birthday, and I think ironically, what set off the 1776 independence victory was taxes. It was the Stamp Act. It was the King George trying to level all kinds of taxes on the colonies, right? And it was a visceral reaction to being taxed without having a voice, without having representation. And now, 249 years later, we're still fighting for the same thing, right? On how much you can tax the American people, to the point where we've said we've had enough. And Latinos themselves, 90% said, okay, that's it, we're taxed enough. So there was polling after polling that showed that nope, we're not going to tolerate any more taxes. We're taxed enough. It's the spending that's the problem in the federal government, especially with what we saw exposed by Doge, right? The kind of spending that was happening, that was waste, fraud, and abuse at really high levels, and systemic, right? It was ingrained. So look, I think this was very audacious by the president. It was very bold, to try to, in a way, package all this together in a big, beautiful bill, and then trust the leadership in the Senate and the leadership in the House, in John Thune and in Mike Johnson, to try to pass this legislation with the minimal margins that they had. They had zero help from the Democrats, who do not want to see Trump get any kind of legislative victory, even if it means it's a massive benefit for the American people. And so this was a massive victory for Trump. Had they lost this, it would have set back not only the economy and ruined any kind of progress they were going to make in the midterms, but send American economy reeling, for a long time to come. And I don't know how long we were going to take to recover from a deficit like this, where you were going to impose the largest tax hike in the history of America, as you mentioned, onto the American taxpayers. And it was the Democrats saying, no, on an average, you're going to give us $2,500 more per person, so that we can, spend it on waste, fraud, and abuse. And it was the Republicans saying, no, we want you to keep more of your money on an average 2,500, and that's not including the child tax credit, the business credits that you were going to get for your small business and everything else. It was basically the Republicans saying, we want you to keep more of your money, and we want to unleash the productive capacities of the private sector to generate growth. I mean, it was a no-brainer, Wadi. And so I think if the Republicans can sell that message, I think they're going to go a long way in the midterms.
When it comes to selling, I want to ask you a little bit. Well, actually, I got two questions for you. I want to talk to you a little bit about the selling aspect and what folks have to do specifically going back to their states, and how do they sell it to the Hispanic community, which they can't take that vote for granted. But first, Daniel, I actually want to talk to you about two characters that folks haven't really been discussing, but they're front and center of this game. And it's J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio. J.D. Vance was one of the key players that President Trump sent to Capitol Hill, a former U.S. senator. Many people were wondering, will he actually be able to have that kind of pull? Because remember, he hadn't finished his 6-year term at that moment. He wasn't sort of like Marco Rubio, someone who had been there 3 to 4 terms. He was sent really in these late hours, because you mentioned it's razor thin margins in the Senate, razor thin margins in the House. He was one of those key players. Same thing, Marco Rubio talked about a lot less, but that photo when they were looking at the vote in the White House, it was President Donald Trump, it was Marco Rubio. What do you think this does to both of these individuals? A little bit more J.D. Vance, who's really in the thick of it. Does this elevate him as someone who we'll maybe see on the ground in 2026? Will he be one of those key spokesperson that we'll see in that campaign season around this bill?
Yeah, obviously it tells me that it was all hands on deck, for the president, right? And everybody from their Secretary of State to the vice president to every senator and every congressman who was allied with him had to be on board, had to be cheerleading this thing and trying to twist the arms of those who were, for one reason or another, were on the fence on this one. And it took the hard work of everybody across the board. Now, I will say in parentheses here that if you'll recall, well, I say you'll recall, but I'll recall that in the 80s when I was growing up, maybe not you, Wadi, but Ronald Reagan, the economy reached rates of the GDP of 6% and 7% economic growth. Now think about that, Wadi. You had gone from under 2% growth under Carter to 6% and 7%, and still the Democrats were criticizing him. I remember that. I remember that clearly, that, it wasn't growth enough, or there was something, wrong with the inequality that was being created, because, some people were getting, a lot of money and some people were not getting any money. There was always something to criticize President Reagan over, and they're going to do exactly the same thing here. It doesn't matter if you unleash the private sector, if you unleash, the energy production that is going to reduce the price of everything across the board, because more energy, more products, and less demand, right? And so you're gonna meet demand and supply side economics. So here's a lesson to Republicans: you have to sell the benefits that Americans are going to be feeling, and if that means the $2,500 per person that you save just in taxes by passing this bill, then say it. The $2,200 child tax credit per person to 40 million families, then say it. That we're going to increase production of energy sources across the board, across America, which will, of course, it's what fuels transportation. It's what fuels production of products and services. It's what fuels everything we build and make. And our electricity bill, all that will go down because of this. Inflation will come down because of increased productivity and increased production in energy. Then you have to explain that to the American people, that we're going to eliminate billions in waste, fraud, and abuse in Medicare, and green energy subsidies are going to be eliminated because of the waste and the fraud that we saw there too. You have to explain that to American people, and sometimes I think we just assume that things sell themselves, or it's plain to see what the benefits are. No, you have to always continue to cheerlead it.
And Daniel, I want to ask you on that, if you can actually expand and actually go a little bit specific on the Hispanic community. I mean, I agree with the selling aspect of this. Is it, and you have a grassroots background with the Libre Initiative even prior to that, Is this done through, is this done through ads? Is this done through events, through town halls? Is this done in Spanish, in English? Like, what's a little bit of that formula? What does selling look like from a tactical point of view?
It starts from the very tippy top, the president, and you mentioned, JD Vance and the cabinet. They're going to have to do rallies, and they're going to have to, of course, get very informed on what the benefits are going to be as they play out on taxes, on the economy, on the GDP growth and energy production, just across the board, right? The kind of benefits that we're seeing in labor participation increasing and unemployment going down and wages going up, inflation coming down, all that is going to be critical. And that every senator on the Republican side, every congressman on the Republican side, in leading up to the midterms, has to remind every American at every opportunity, at every rally, whether it's on commercials or whether it's live at an event, the benefits that are starting to play out across the board. Look, right now, in actuality, we're starting to turn the economy around. Just already into 6 months, we've seen salary increases start going up. Unemployment is down. Inflation is down. The interest rate should start going down, and Powell should get on this. And also, the border is absolutely under operational control, and that's no lie anymore. There's a lot less regulations in the production of energy, and we're going to see a lot less, which means more increases in energy production. This was not the time to go backward and impose a tax that was going to be an average of $2,000 per individual across the board. And Wadi, if you'll recall, when we were going through this inflation crisis, families on an average were paying $10,000 more per year for the cost of living. Now think about that. You increased the cost of living by $10,000, and here we're talking about decreasing it, bringing down inflation, bringing down interest rates, and bringing down energy prices. Across the board, Americans are going to have to be reminded by every single member of the center right.
Very much so. And of course, this is all going to come in the context of the 2026 elections, which the map actually sort of benefits Democrats in the sense that many Senate Republicans are up for re-election, and they're up for re-election in a lot of purple states, which means that Republicans will very much be on defense. It's going to be a lot of work in this space for them, but they have this bill, and they have a whole year of work that they can do in this space. Another topic that you just brought up, Daniel.
But let me say really quick though, Wadi, senators like Jon Ossoff are in trouble as well, because they were obstinate. They were doing everything to try to stop a bill that is going to be of massive benefit to the American people, and he should be target number one.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, there are those key states as well for Democrats that they're going to have to be on defense and explain to their constituents their votes in this space. I was going to say that another topic that you brought up is the topic of immigration, border security, operational control of border security. The rhetoric in this space has been very negative and very counterproductive in many ways from the left, from the radical left, from Democrats. Sadly, today we're receiving the news coming out of McAllen, Texas, that there was an individual who showed up to one of the facilities, one of the centers, armed, ready to shoot, but he encountered obviously the officers of border security, officers of the law in this space. Daniel, you live in McAllen, Texas, in the Mission area. What's your situation there?
So, what's fascinating, I was going back and forth with a couple of nephews, who are border agents, and they were telling me what had happened. And there are, it kind of angers you, Wadi, when Democratic lawmakers who have been very aggressive about showing up at, ICE centers, at Border Patrol detention centers, and in offices like the one here in McAllen that got shot up, when they create this kind of climate, it's almost like they're inducing it, right? They're giving license to nut jobs and wackos like this individual who showed up shooting through the door. Thank God it was bulletproof. But my nephew told me that the dispatcher at the center was absolutely scared to death of what was going on. And in a way, luckily, he chose the wrong Border Patrol station to shoot up, because the members who are from that station are BORTAC and BORSTAR members. These are the elite of the Border Patrol. These are the folks that do the special operations, and they may not have of course anticipated this, but they were ready, and they were always ready, and they took this guy out in a flash, right? And avoided any kind of fatalities, of our law enforcement agents. But this is a lesson, this should ring across the nation, especially to these folks who think that they can be irresponsible with their rhetoric and demonizing our law enforcement officials, who are trying to secure our border, who are trying to make our nation safer, and putting them at risk like this. It's like, yeah, of course, you're not the one doing the shooting. You're not the nut job, who went in there with worst of intentions. But you are creating a climate that allows for that induces these people to take that next step. And so I would just caution, the folks with angry rhetoric, that there is a more productive way of advocacy, of representing your cause, in a way that is more civil, and in a way that seeks common ground, with those that may be opposed to your view. But violence is never the answer, and especially being reckless and irresponsible with your expressions, with your words. You should check them.
And what I think is one of the most important things, I know we talked about the climate before, but we need to talk about the after. One of the quickest ways where you can disconnect yourself from those actions, right? If you're someone from the left, is that opportunity to really disavow what's going on, to say that this is not the way that things are done, right? That if you want to see progress, if you want to see actual conversation and debate on ideas, this is not how to do it. The problem that we've seen many times to the left, and I'm referring very much to what we saw in LA, is this, honestly, apart from the senator from Pennsylvania, we did not see too many folks come out and disavow what they're saying, right? You can try to say, hey, I never specifically said go and shoot. I never specifically said this. But when you're someone who is sort of contributing to the climate in this area, when you're bringing rhetoric, you also have a responsibility to come after these events and say, this does not represent us. This is wrong. Speak out against those individuals. Because if not, they feel like there's a level of support. The silence speaks a volume many times. And I think that's where Democrats are failing. They're failing not just on the before, but they're failing on the after. Would you agree?
100%. Where the hell is the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez who screamed about stochastic terrorism? With what you say induces somebody else to take on, some kind of violent action against, the individual that you're targeting. That's exactly what you're doing right now. This is the definition of that term. And so you're right. Where is the why don't you call it out? And no one's going to begrudge you for it. This doesn't take humility. This is common sense to just come out and disavow this, to condemn it. And I'd be applauding you. I'd be saying, bravo, finally a brave voice on the left who can stand up and call this out for what it is, which is an outrage, right? This is un-American. We do not impose our will on anybody through violence, much less, and to try to assassinate somebody to impose your will. That is, the definition of terrorism, right? To use violence to achieve your means. And so I would strongly, of course, endorse what you said, Wadi. We should have more members of the left coming out and really sort of joining with members on the right and calling both sides out, right? So we need to distance ourselves from this kind of tactic, that is being used, that is more aggressive, more violent, because again, it just sort of induces the nut jobs to take it to another level.
Well, there you have it, folks. Two key topics when it comes to the one big, beautiful bill and the political ramifications when it comes to next year's election. And also the topic of border security, immigration continues to be front and center. Unfortunately, this time in the news by something just devastating that we saw in Texas. Daniel, thank you again for your time. That has been all, folks, for Garza, Gaitan, and the game. That's our show for today.